The day my daughter called and said, "I sold your house and your car so I can travel to Europe," was the day I smiled because she had no idea that the house she sold was never really hers to begin with. I was sitting on an old plastic chair in Dr. Harris's waiting room in a small coastal town in Florida when the phone rang. It was my daughter, Emily. Her voice sounded strange, cold in a way that made me shiver. She said, "Mom, tomorrow I'm leaving for Europe with Ryan. I sold the house in Clearwater Beach and your Camry. We needed the money fast. Goodbye." Then she hung up. 30 years of raising her, sacrificing for her, and now she treated me like a stranger. I took a deep breath and smiled, because there was one thing my daughter didn't know. My name is Barbara Collins, 59 years old. Until that day, I thought I understood my daughter. I'd been a widow for 6 years. My husband, Richard Collins, died of a heart attack while we were watching the evening news as we had done for 33 years. That night, he'd made me a cup of peppermint tea with a few oatmeal cookies, like he always did when I was anxious about my test results. "Relax, sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead. "Everything will be fine tomorrow." Those were his last words to me. Since Richard's passing, Emily had started visiting me more often. Or at least, that's what I thought. She came twice a week, drove me to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments. "Mom, you have to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," she'd say, smiling a smile I once thought was full of love. Now I know it was a smile of calculation. The beach house in Clearwater had always been our family's sanctuary. Richard and I bought it when Emily was 16, paying it off over nearly 10 years. Every summer, we'd go there, birthdays, Christmases, gatherings by the shore. Later, little Noah. I cooked, cleaned, did the laundry, and loved every moment of it. I never imagined she'd only see money in all of that. And that Toyota Camry, the car Richard cared for like a child. He washed it every Sunday, changed the oil regularly, and always parked it perfectly under the oak tree in front of the house. Emily knew what that car meant to me. It was the last piece of him I had left. His cologne still lingered on the leather seats. His favorite country CDs were still in the player. When Emily hung up, I sat there among the other patients in the waiting room, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. A strange calm washed over me, a peace I hadn't felt since Richard's death. Because at that moment, I remembered something he once told me. 3 weeks before he passed, Richard had handed me a brown leather folder. "Barbara," he said, "keep this in the closet. If something ever happens to me, only open it when you're ready." I tucked it away and didn't think much about it. After the funeral, with all the grief and the endless paperwork, I completely forgot it existed. The nurse called me into the exam room. "Doctor." Harris checked my heart and said everything looked fine, just to cut down on salt and walk more. I nodded, but my mind had already drifted elsewhere, to that brown folder, to Emily's cold voice, and to Ryan, the man I'd never trusted. He'd never liked me, always treated me like a burden in their lives. After leaving the clinic, I slowly walked to the bus stop. There was something almost poetic in this tragedy. My daughter thought she'd left me with nothing, but she didn't know that Richard Collins, my brilliant, thoughtful husband, had planned everything far better than anyone could imagine. The bus arrived. I took a seat by the window, watching. The streets of Tampa drift by the houses, the shops, the people rushing about. Everyone has their own story, their own secret. And so did I, a secret that was about to be revealed. When I got home, I went straight to the bedroom and opened the closet. The brown folder was still there, exactly where he'd left it. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Inside were several documents. My name was written on the front in Richard's familiar handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. Outside, the sky was growing darker. I opened the folder slowly, as if unwrapping a birthday gift. What I saw inside left me speechless. There were notarized documents, property deeds, bank statements, and a handwritten letter. 2. My eyes blurred with tears as I recognized his familiar handwriting. My dearest Barbara, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. I'm sorry for not telling you everything while I was alive, but I just wanted to spare you from worry. Over the years, I've invested our savings in real estate and company shares. We don't just own the house in Clearwater, we have 5 other properties, including the building where Emily and Ryan live. We also hold shares in 2 rapidly growing companies here in Florida. You're a wealthy woman, my love, and now it's all documented in your name. My hands trembled as I looked through the papers. There were documents for several properties across Florida, an apartment in Tampa, a small hotel near Daytona Beach, and just as the letter said, a 15-story building in Miami, where Emily was living. Richard Collins, my husband, had secretly owned them all for 8 years, registered under a company I'd never even heard of. According to the paperwork, I was the sole heir of that company. There were also bank statements from accounts I hadn't known existed. The numbers were staggering. Richard had worked as a bus driver for 35 years, yet it turned out he'd been a quiet, brilliant investor. Every dollar we saved, every sacrifice we made, he had quietly multiplied it, and I had never known. In his letter, Richard explained that he kept it all secret, so I wouldn't have to worry about money, and so Emily wouldn't know the truth about our finances. You know our daughter Barbara. If she ever found out how much we had, her attitude would change. I want her to love us for who we are, not for what we own. How ironic. My daughter had abandoned me because she thought I had nothing when in truth, I had everything. The beach house in Clearwater that she sold was, according to the documents, registered under the company's name, not mine personally. That sale had been completely illegal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my small house, touching the old furniture, the worn decorations Emily used to call outdated. I looked at the family photos on the wall, especially the one where Emily was 7, sitting in Richard's lap, smiling so brightly. When did that sweet little girl disappear and become someone so calculating? The next morning, the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice sounded softer this time. But I'd learned not to trust sudden changes. Mom, how are you? I just wanted to tell you that we've transferred the money from selling the house and the car. We sent your share to your account. My share? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Yes, of course. We couldn't just leave you with nothing. You get 30%, that's fair, right? We needed the money for an investment in Europe. Ryan has a great business opportunity over there. 30% from my own assets. How generous. This afternoon, we're all packed. We'll be gone for at least 6 months. Maybe longer if things go well. But don't worry, Mom, when we get back, we'll help you find a smaller apartment, something that fits your needs better. Fits my needs, as if she even knew what I needed. All right, Emily. Have a safe trip. I knew you'd understand, Mom. You've always been the most forgiving person. I love you so much, she said, then hung up. I sat there holding the phone and started laughing. For the first time since Richard's death, it was genuine laughter. The situation was so absurd, it was almost funny. My daughter had stolen from me, kicked me out of my own house, and spoken to me with arrogance, all to fund a European dream I knew would soon collapse. But what hurt the most wasn't the money. It was how easily she erased me from her life. 30 years of sacrifice, love, and devotion, gone with 2 phone calls. I opened my laptop and checked my bank account. Sure enough, there was a deposit the amount they thought was generous, but to me, it was nothing more than a joke. They had sold the beach house for far too little, probably in a rush for cash. And Richard's Camry, his beloved car, had been practically given away. That afternoon, from my window, I saw Emily and Ryan loading their suitcases into a taxi. He dragged 2 large suitcases while she carried an expensive designer bag. They laughed, kissed, and talked about their future like 2 kids chasing some new American dream. Neither of them looked my way. Neither of them said goodbye. When the taxi pulled away, I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, with Richard's documents spread out in front of me. I knew I had to make a decision. I could call a lawyer, reclaim the assets, take them to court, and win everything back. But something inside me whispered there was a better way. A way for them to learn a lesson they would never forget. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I dreamed of Richard, sitting in his old armchair, reading the morning paper like he always did. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "It's time, sweetheart. Time to stand up for yourself." I woke up with a strange feeling. Not happiness. Exactly. But not pain either. It was determination. For the first time since Richard's death, I had a clear goal. I would take back everything, but not in the way Emily expected. A few days later, I began to grasp the true scale of my fortune. I called William Scott, the lawyer who had handled Richard's estate after his passing. He was nearly speechless as he flipped through the brown folder. "Mrs. Collins, your husband was quite a remarkable man," Mr. Scott said, scanning each page. "These investments were made over 15 years carefully and strategically. You now possess a significant portfolio, including the building where your daughter currently lives." Meanwhile, I kept my daily routines. Waking up early, eating breakfast alone, watering the rose bushes Richard once loved in the small garden behind our home. The neighbors greeted me with that same mix of pity and curiosity, the kind people usually reserve for a quiet widow living alone in a peaceful Tampa neighborhood. That afternoon, Karen, my longtime neighbor, came over while I was sweeping the porch. "Barbara," I heard, "Emily went to Europe and left you here by yourself. Is that true?" she asked, her tone full of genuine concern. "Yes, Karen. She went with Ryan, said it was for business. I didn't mention the house or the car. It wasn't time yet. Oh my, what will you do now?" Everyone thought Richard didn't leave much money. If only she knew the truth. I just smiled. "Don't worry, Karen. I'll be fine." She looked at me with that familiar expression, half sympathy, half curiosity. It was the same look I'd seen since Richard's funeral, sad, yet quietly relieved that tragedy hadn't chosen their home instead. "Barbara, if you need anything, anything at all, you call me, okay?" Those kinds of words came every day. The grocery clerk, the pharmacist, even the plumber, they all spoke to me in that same gentle, pitying tone, as if addressing someone fragile. I just smiled, thanked them, and kept my little secret. It was almost amusing, like living 2 lives at once. On the outside, the gentle widow. Inside, a woman quietly preparing for something far greater. For the first few weeks, Emily was completely silent. No calls, no messages, not even a photo from her trip. To her, I had disappeared the moment she got her money. But I knew sooner or later that would change. Then, one Wednesday, my lawyer called with an update. "Mrs. Collins, we've successfully nullified the sale of the Clearwater Beach house. That transaction was completely illegal since the property was registered under the company's name, not yours personally. The buyer will receive a refund." "Excellent, Mr. Scott. And what about the building where Emily's living?" "That case is more complicated. Technically, you're still the owner through the company, but we'll need to adjust some paperwork to transfer the title directly to you. It'll take about 3 weeks." After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen with another cup of coffee, thinking about Emily. She'd been in Europe for over a month, and I hadn't heard a single word. To me, she'd been gone since the moment she betrayed me. But I knew that was about to change. I decided to drive down to the old beach house in Clearwater. I followed the same coastal road Richard and I had driven hundreds of times over the past 30 years. The house looked exactly as I remembered, small, painted pale yellow, with a porch facing the glittering blue ocean. The new owner had only added a few potted plants by the fence. Everything else was untouched. I sat across the street on the curb, staring at that house for nearly an hour. Memories flooded back. Those warm summer afternoons when Emily was still a little girl, running barefoot on the sand, building castles by the shore. Richard grilled meat on the charcoal barbecue he built himself, while I tossed salad in the kitchen. Then our little girl grew up, brought friends over, then Ryan. All those memories now turned into a business transaction. An old man stepped out of the house and saw me sitting there. He came closer. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine, thank you. Just remembering some old times." We were told the old lady was very sick and had to sell the house quickly. We thought it was a good deal, but now we've learned the sale wasn't legal. We've had to return the house. "Did you meet the person who sold it?" "No. Everything went through an agent. They said the daughter handled it all because her mother wasn't mentally sound." How sad, I thought to myself. If he knew the truth, he'd be even sadder. "I'm glad you didn't lose your money." "Yes, we were lucky. But now we'll have to find another place. We really loved this house." I walked away, my heart heavy. Not because of the money, but because of how easily Emily had built lies about me. She'd told people I was sick and weak, using my own image to justify her theft. In her eyes, I was no longer a person, just an obstacle to remove. That night, my lawyer William called again. "Mrs. Collins, there's something else. We've discovered that your daughter also sold your husband's Camry." "I know, Mr. Scott. She mentioned it. The problem is, the car was still in your name, but she had a power of attorney. Do you recall signing it?" That was when Emily's plan had begun. I vaguely remembered signing some papers she'd brought over a few months after Richard's death. She said it was just inheritance paperwork. At that time, I was drowning in grief, so I signed without reading. "I understand, Mr. Scott. Is there any way to get the car back?" "It's possible, but difficult. We'd have to prove you signed under deception or impaired judgment." "Then do it," I said. "I want back everything they stole from me." The following weeks, I truly lived two lives. In the mornings, I was the poor, widowed woman going to the market for a few groceries, chatting with neighbors, keeping up appearances. But by afternoon, I became someone else reviewing documents, calling William Scott, and planning my next move. I studied finance and investment things I'd never imagined I'd need to know, and I discovered that Richard was even smarter than I'd thought. Every one of his investments had been carefully planned. For example, the building where Emily lived didn't just generate rental income. It was located in Miami's Brickell district, where property values were skyrocketing. I also found out that Ryan, Emily's husband, was drowning in debt. He'd taken out loans and mortgaged their apartment without realizing they didn't actually own it. When the banks uncovered the truth, he was going to be in serious trouble. On a Friday afternoon, William called again. "Mrs. Collins, all the legal procedures are complete. You now have full control of your entire estate. We also managed to recover the Camry." "Excellent. Mr. Scott, now I need you to do one more thing for me." "Of course, Mrs. Barbara. I want you to prepare an eviction notice for my daughter." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "Are you certain?" "I'm absolutely certain. She decided I no longer mattered in her life. Now she'll learn what it feels like to lose everything." "Understood. Shall I send the notice to Europe?" No, Mr. Scott. Hand it to her in person when she returns. I had a feeling that would happen soon, and I was right. That afternoon, my neighbor Karen came running over, excitement on her face. Barbara, have you heard about Ryan? My cousin works at the bank. He says Ryan's in big trouble. They're investigating the loans he took out using their apartment as collateral. But it turns out the apartment doesn't even belong to him. Really? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Yes. And apparently, Emily had no idea. They say she'll have to fly back from Europe to sort it all out. I smiled. Perfect. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd expected. Emily had chosen Ryan over me, traded her mother's love for a man, and now she was about to learn he wasn't who she thought he was. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of peppermint tea, looking up at the starry sky. Richard once said, "The stars are the souls of those who lived fully watching over their families from above." If that was true, then surely he was up there now, smiling, watching his plan fall perfectly into place. Thank you for still protecting me, even after you've gone. The next morning, my lawyer William called early. Mrs. Collins, I have news. Your daughter just returned to the country. She's at the airport alone. Alone? Yes. It seems Ryan stayed in Europe. Word is, they had a big fight. I see. Have you sent the letter? I'm sending it today. She'll receive it tomorrow. I hung up and sat in the kitchen, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and satisfaction. After weeks of quiet preparation, the moment to act had finally come. Emily was about to learn that her mother was no longer the weak woman she once thought she could control. She came back on Tuesday night. I knew because the next morning, Karen told me she'd seen Emily dragging a small suitcase, her face pale, eyes dark and swollen, like she'd cried through the entire flight. No one was with her. Ryan had stayed behind in Europe. When the building staff asked for her key, she didn't have it. She had to ask management to open the door with a spare. Ryan had kept the keys, which meant he wasn't planning to return. Or maybe Emily had found something out and fled. Either way, my daughter was home, and soon she'd receive a very special welcome gift from her mother. That afternoon, William called to confirm. Emily has 30 days to vacate the apartment per legal notice. When he asked if I was sure about my decision, I answered immediately. My daughter kicked me out of my own home with a 2-minute phone call. She sold my property without asking, treated me like garbage. Now she'll learn that every action comes with consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, imagining Emily's face as she opened the letter, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally panic. She'd probably think it was a mistake, or that someone was trying to trick her. But once she checked, she'd realize everything was perfectly legitimate. The next morning, almost as if it had been scripted, the phone rang at 8 a.m. It was Emily, her voice trembling, desperate. She said she needed to see me immediately. When I asked, "How was your trip to Europe?" she snapped. "Not the time for that, Mom. I just got this strange letter. It says, I have to leave my apartment in 30 days. There must be some mistake, right? Do you know anything about this?" I asked. "Who sent the letter?" "It's from a company called Collins Investments LLC. I've never even heard of it before." I almost laughed. Richard, my husband, had named the company after our family. Poetic and precise. I kept my tone calm. "That's strange. I've never heard of it either." Then Emily began to explain. Ryan had abandoned her in Europe, run off with another woman, leaving her alone in the middle of chaos. She said she had no idea what was happening. I knew, and that was all the confirmation I needed. Ryan had probably disappeared when the money ran out, or when he realized his legal troubles back in the States were worse than he thought. Poor Emily, she had betrayed her mother for a man who wasn't worth a dime. Through her tears, she said she had no one else left, that I was the only person who could help her. Ironic, isn't it? Only after losing everything did she remember she still had a mother. I told her she could come over any time, and she arrived almost immediately. When I opened the door, I barely recognized my daughter. Emily was thin, her eyes hollow, her expensive dress wrinkled, her hair messy, her face swollen from crying. For a moment, I thought she might hug me, but she stopped herself, as if suddenly remembering everything she had done. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where I'd read Richard's letter weeks earlier. On that old wooden chair, Emily looked small and lost, just like the little girl who used to sit there and tell me about being bullied at school. Her voice broke as she said, "Mom, I regret everything. I know I treated you horribly. I can't even forgive myself." I replied softly, "It's over now, Emily." But she went on, "I said awful things to you, then walked away, and now I have no one left." When I asked about Ryan, she broke down in tears. "He lied to me, Mom. There were no job offers in Europe. He just wanted to escape his debts and use the money from selling your house to pay them off." "How much in total?" I asked. "A lot. He'd been borrowing for years, using our apartment as collateral. But now I've found out that apartment wasn't even his." I smiled to myself. My moment had come. I pretended to be naive. "I don't know anything about that, sweetheart. Property matters can be complicated." Emily said the bank was now demanding payment from both her and Ryan since they were married. She was also legally responsible. And then came the eviction notice. She choked up. "I have no money, no job, nowhere to live." Then she cried real tears, full of despair. And in that moment, the mother in me softened a little. I told her she didn't have to go anywhere, that she could stay as long as she wanted, but she insisted she'd already taken advantage of my kindness too long, that I also needed money and couldn't support her forever. It was fascinating to see how completely wrong Emily's image of me was. In her eyes, I was just a poor widow, living off a few savings. In reality, I had enough money to buy the entire building in Miami where we'd found Richard's old jewelry. That afternoon, my lawyer, William Scott, called with a detailed report on Ryan's debts. The situation was worse than we thought. He owed more than $180,000 to several banks and even loan sharks. The worst part was that he'd used forged documents, even faking Emily's signature on some of the loan agreements. When I asked whether that meant Emily was still liable, William explained that legally, it was complicated. If we could prove she had no knowledge of it, we might free her from part of the debt, but it would be a long and costly process. A good attorney specializing in fraud cases could charge up to $40,000, with no guarantee of winning. A few days later, on a Monday morning, William called again with the news I'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Collins, the court has accepted the evidence. We've cleared all of Ryan's debts from Emily's name. The court officially recognized her as a victim of forgery." That was the perfect moment. After weeks of watching my daughter struggle, work, and reflect on her mistakes, it was finally time to show her she had never truly been alone, that someone had been quietly watching over her all along. I asked William to arrange a meeting. It's time Emily learned the whole truth. We scheduled it for Friday morning at his office. I told Emily I knew a lawyer who might help her with her legal troubles, but didn't give any details. She agreed to come, though she was nervous, thinking she couldn't afford the consultation fees. We arrived right on time. Emily wore the nicest clothes. She had left a blue blazer with frayed shoulders, though it now hung loosely on her thin frame. She fidgeted with her hands, clearly expecting yet another piece of bad news in her endless string of misfortunes. William Scott greeted us warmly. Emily thanked him for his time but said her financial situation was difficult and she probably couldn't afford his services. He smiled. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about." Then he handed me a thick folder. Emily opened it. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise and then to shock. I don't understand. It says here that Ryan forged my signature, that there's proof of fraud, and that I'm not responsible for any of it. William nodded, confirming that his team had spent weeks investigating, gathering enough evidence to prove she was a victim of identity fraud. Emily asked, her voice trembling. But who paid for this investigation? I don't have any money. Lawyer William looked at me. It was my moment. I told Emily there was something I needed to tell her. She looked at me, confused. I took a deep breath after weeks of keeping it secret. I was finally going to tell the truth. I said, "Your father left me far more than you ever imagined, so much more." She frowned. "What do you mean, Mom?" I gestured for William to hand her the second folder. He passed it to Emily. Inside were all the assets Richard had quietly built over the years: property deeds, bank statements, investment certificates, and ownership documents. Emily read each page silently, her face shifting through every emotion: surprise, doubt, shock, and finally, understanding. She whispered, "So that means you're the owner of the building I live in?" I nodded. "It's all mine. The investments, the bank accounts, and the other houses as well." I also confirmed that the beachfront house in Clearwater, the one she had sold, was actually mine, and that the sale had been completely fraudulent. I had taken it all back. Emily stared at the folder, trying to process everything unfolding before her. Her voice was hoarse when she asked, "When did you find all this out?" "The day you called me when I was at the doctor's office." "So, you knew everything when I came back from Europe, begging you for help?" I nodded. "And you knew you could fix everything while I cried myself to sleep every night?" I nodded again. The room fell silent. Emily closed the folders and looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you let me go through all that when you could have helped?" That was the question I had been waiting for. I answered calmly, "Because there's a lesson you needed to learn, one no one could teach you with words alone." "What lesson?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked straight into my daughter's eyes and said slowly, "You had to learn the value of what you lost, the value of family, respect, and responsibility. When you abandoned me, you didn't just take my money. You took my dignity, my love, and my trust." Emily burst into tears. But this time, they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of realization. She sobbed. "I left you when you needed me most. I treated you like a stranger." I nodded. "But you still saved me." "Yes," I said, "but not in the way you think. I didn't save you with money. I saved you by letting you fall so you could learn how to save yourself." At that moment, lawyer William Scott gently spoke up, his tone warm. "Mrs. Collins covered all the legal expenses to free you from debt. She also recovered every asset that was sold fraudulently. You're completely free now, Miss Emily." Emily turned to me, her voice shaking. "Then, what about the cleaning job I just got?" I told her that if she wanted, she could quit, but I hoped she wouldn't. She asked why, and I explained, "That job is teaching you something you never learned when life was too easy: the value of effort, the dignity of honest work, and the meaning of every dollar you earn with your own hands." Emily wiped her tears and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. It was no longer the look of a child who needed her mother, but the look of a grown woman who finally respected another woman. She asked me, "Do you forgive me?" I smiled. "I forgave you a long time ago. The question is, can you forgive yourself?" Emily bowed her head and whispered, "I don't know. I did things that feel unforgivable." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Everyone makes mistakes, Emily. What matters is what you do after you recognize them. Lawyer William politely rose, leaving the two of us alone in silence, both of us trying to sort through the emotions left after the storm. Emily spoke, earnest. I want you to know one thing. Even if you had no money, even if you really were the poor widow I thought you were, I would still have learned this lesson. I asked. What lesson, dear? She answered, tears falling slowly. That there is nothing more precious than having someone who loves you unconditionally. In the past weeks, the only thing that kept me standing was knowing you were still there, that no matter how badly I'd ruined my life, you would still be my mother. And that would never change. I smiled, and she continued. But now I understand that love cannot be taken for granted. I must earn it every day with respect, with gratitude, and with actions, not just words. We were no longer only mother and daughter bound by blood, but two women who had chosen each other again after passing through the hardest test. The following weeks were a time of rebuilding, but not in the way Emily had expected. Even though she now knew I had the means to fix everything, she kept the evening cleaning job. She said she needed to finish what she had started. She couldn't simply slip back into a comfortable life as if nothing had happened. I asked, Are you sure? You don't have to keep punishing yourself. She smiled gently. This is not punishment, Mom. This is how I remind myself who I am and who I want to become. I watched her put on that work uniform, something unthinkable months earlier, when she had lived in a luxury apartment with Ryan. But now, in her posture, in her eyes, in every gesture, I saw something different. Not the desperate, broken woman who had come to my door, but someone who had reclaimed her dignity. That afternoon, Karen, my neighbor, dropped by as usual. She said, There are a lot of strange rumors in the neighborhood, Barbara. People say you're not as poor as we thought. Someone saw Emily leaving a fancy law office, then saw her at the bank paying off debts. That must have cost a lot of money. Karen knew me well enough not to be fooled for long. When she asked if I had hidden the truth about my finances, I poured her a cup of tea and invited her to sit, then said quietly, It's time I was honest with someone. I told her that Richard, my husband, had left me far more than anyone imagined. Enough that Emily and I would never have to worry about money again. Karen's eyes widened. My goodness. So why have you been pretending to be poor all these months? I smiled and said slowly, Because I needed Emily to learn something that couldn't be taught any other way. I told her the whole story from Emily's cruel call when she drove me out to my quiet plan of revenge. The weeks I watched my daughter hit rock bottom. And finally, the moment of revelation in William Scott's office. Karen sighed and shook her head. That's both cruel and brilliant. Cruel, because I let my own daughter suffer even though I could have helped her right away. But brilliant, because she understood why I did it. Emily needed to relearn the value of what she had lost. If I had simply used money to fix everything, she would have learned that someone would always come to rescue her from the consequences of her mistakes, and she would never truly change. Karen asked, But didn't it break your heart, watching your daughter suffer like that? I answered, my eyes distant. Every day, every night, every morning, it hurt. Seeing her cry, seeing her drag herself to work exhausted, it felt like my heart was being crushed. But I knew if I saved her too soon, she'd never learn the full lesson. Karen was silent for a while, then asked softly, And now? Do you think she's learned it? I smiled. Just look at her. Emily knows she has enough money to live comfortably, yet she still chooses to work. She knows she could move into a better place, yet she wants to stay with me. She knows she's free of debt, yet she uses her savings to help other women who are struggling. Karen was astonished. Emily is helping other people? I nodded, explaining that she had become close to the women she worked with at her cleaning job and had used her own paycheck to help a single mother pay for childcare. Karen smiled softly. That's not the same Emily who left for Europe. I nodded. No, this woman is different now. Now Emily understands that money is just a tool, not a goal. Dignity comes from work and respect, not from possessions. That evening, when Emily came home from work, she saw me reading in the living room. She said, "Mom, I have something to tell you." Karen teased. Is she the daughter of that rich lady up north? Emily laughed. That's right. My mom has enough money that I don't need to work anymore. Then why do you still work? Karen asked. Emily replied, because I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet. Karen chuckled. That's the difference between having money and knowing how to live truly rich. Your mother taught you that. I smiled, agreeing that Karen was truly wise. Emily added that Karen had helped her realize something important, that the issue isn't how much money you have, but how you use it and your relationship with it. Emily sat beside me on the sofa, held my hand, and said she had made a decision. I'm going to keep living with you, Mom, but not as a daughter moving back home. As a grown woman choosing to live with her mother, I asked. What's the difference? She smiled. I want our relationship to be a partnership between 2 independent women who love and respect each other. I told her she didn't have to do that, but she firmly said things had to be different. Before, she had been a daughter who took a mother's love and care for granted. Now, she wanted to become a woman who truly valued and nurtured the most important relationship in her life. I asked about her job, and she said she would keep working but not necessarily as a cleaner forever. She wanted to study, to prepare for something more meaningful in life, but she would take it one step at a time, earning every opportunity through her own effort. I asked, what do you want to study? Her eyes lit up. I want to study social work. These past weeks made me realize how many women live in despair with no one to help them. I want to use my own experience and our resources to support them. I was speechless. Emily had not only learned to appreciate what she had, but also how to turn her pain into positive action. I asked about Ryan. She said lawyer William had told her he'd been arrested in France for a fake marriage and financial fraud. I stayed silent, looking at my daughter. The woman sitting in front of me was no longer the old Emily, but someone who had risen from the ruins, strong, proud, and free. Ryan would soon be deported, but Emily said, her voice calm and steady, honestly, he doesn't matter anymore. No, Mom. Actually, Ryan helped me in a way. If he hadn't betrayed me, I would never have hit rock bottom. And if I hadn't hit rock bottom, I never would have learned the true value of what I have. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. My plan had worked perfectly. Emily had not only learned the lessons she needed, but had become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I knew for certain that Richard, my husband, would have been proud if he were still alive. 6 months later, our lives reached a new balance, something no one could have imagined before. Emily completed her certification course in social work, and I decided to use part of my assets to create the Women's New Beginnings Foundation, a fund to support abandoned women, both financially and emotionally. One morning, Emily brought home a letter from the university. She had been accepted into the master's program in sociology at the University of California. I asked, when do you start? Her eyes shone with pride. Next semester, Mom. But I want you to know I'll be paying for my tuition myself. She had been saving money from her job at the social center, where she now worked. I asked, are you sure? We can easily afford to pay for it. She smiled. I know, but I need to do this on my own. It's part of who I am now. That afternoon, Karen came over for tea, as usual. She said, half joking, half sincere. I have to admit, at first I thought you were being cruel to Emily. I asked. And now? She smiled. Now I think you're the wisest mother I've ever met. And she was right. Emily, the young woman sitting in the living room studying for her exam, was no longer the same person who once left for Europe. Now she carried a calmness that came from within, a confidence built on true ability, not on money or status. Karen told me she'd run into Emily at the market the day before. She was buying vegetables for a poor family she'd been helping through her work at the social center. Karen asked, "Why don't you use government funds instead of your own money?" Emily smiled. "Because some things can't be measured by a government budget." That evening, Emily and I had dinner on the porch, a new routine we'd grown to love. We talked about our day, shared our plans for the future, and simply enjoyed the peace of being together. Emily said, "Mom, I've realized something. True love isn't the one that always tells us what we want to hear, but the one that teaches us what we need to learn even when it hurts." I nodded. That's a hard lesson, but a necessary one. Emily smiled, her eyes glowing under the porch light. Ryan used to tell me things that made me feel special, that made me believe I deserved a luxurious life without effort. But you taught me that true wealth comes from work, from respect, and from genuine relationships. That night, after Emily went upstairs to study, I stayed outside alone, looking up at the starry sky and thinking about Richard. I had kept my promise to him to care for our daughter in the way she needed to be cared for, not in the way that was easiest. I hadn't saved her with money, I'd saved her by teaching her to save herself. The justice I found wasn't revenge, it was a lesson. Not punishment, but transformation. And in the end, we gained something far more valuable than money: a genuine bond, rebuilt on a foundation so strong that no storm could destroy it. Richard had been right. The true legacy isn't the money you leave behind, but the wisdom to use it the right way, at the right time, to teach the lessons that truly matter. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real events, with names and settings changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Though our circumstances may differ, many of us can see a part of ourselves in Barbara and Emily's journey between love, pain, and awakening. Have you ever stood at that crossroads, choosing between silence and speaking up, between forgiveness and justice? There is no single answer, only the path your heart and faith will guide you to. In the end, what Barbara found wasn't victory, but peace in God and the faith that He blesses those who choose love over resentment. On the end screen, we invite you to watch 2 more of your favorite videos, where more heartfelt stories await to be told.